What it comes down to is this. In 1968, the U.S. Supreme Court decided a case from 3 years earlier, in 1965, where an experienced detective, 4 decades of law enforcement, not only that Cleveland detective was familiar with the area. He had walked the beat. So you got a veteran cop who knows the community, who saw 2 guys on the corner. Did he rush up on them? No. He sat back and watched them. And these 2 guys huddled on the corner. One walked back and forth to a jewelry store 5 times, never went in, and then came back to the corner. The second walked back and forth to the jewelry store 6 times, a total of 11 times. The cop still didn't move in. A third guy comes out of nowhere, joins the 2, huddles with them. He walks toward the jewelry store. The cop still sits back and chills. And then as they all 3 approach the jewelry store, the cop, by the way, is 300 feet away so he can see everything. He either stood or sat, we don't know if he was in the car or on his feet, but whatever. He observed this from 300 feet away for about 12 minutes. So my point is, ultimately, the Supreme Court ruled that what the cop did was lawful because he had quote-unquote reasonable suspicion.
Right.
So what different states and what different cities have done, they took that reasonable suspicion and said because that detective used stop and frisk, that it was lawful.
Right.
But they're giving non-lawyers, the public, only half the story. Not even half the story. They're giving about 10% of the story. There's a 90% that they don't talk about. If every jurisdiction required their cops to do what that Cleveland detective did,
right,
then we wouldn't have all this stop and frisk.
Right.
In Philly, they see 2 guys, black guys with hoodies walking down the street, they move in on it.
Right.
But this detective, and I'm no fan of cops, but I have to give him credit. He did show the kind of restraint that the cops in Philly don't show. I don't like the ultimate decision in the Terry versus Ohio, but my point is we can work with that. At the church meeting on last Friday, April 29th, you have the city solicitor and the city officials leading people to believe that their hands are tied with Terry versus Ohio. That now we have to change that and make it a higher standard, that now the cops should have a probable cause burden instead of a reasonable suspicion burden.
Right.
And I'm sitting back fuming as a lawyer saying, somebody stop them, because they're fooling the people.
They're just lying to us.
Absolutely, like what's going on here? So my point is, there's no need for the higher probable cause standard. And by the way, when I talk about these standards, the best way to describe this, reasonable suspicion is at the low end.
Right.
That means you got a strong, what we call articulable suspicion. You don't know if that guy's doing something wrong, but you can articulate something, like that detective in Cleveland.
Right.
He can say, hey, these guys walked back from the jewelry store 11 times, and they huddled and all that. He